Yes, welcome to a videotaping of something that I've wanted to do for some time, and now the hour is such where it's just time to get it done. My name is Nolan Harkness, Nolan J Harkness, and I live in Wellsburg, New York. And some of you are family and friends, so you know who I am, and some of you are just tuning in. And I hope to educate anyone listening in on something called mortgage company fraud and a journey that I've been on for about 10 years to try to save my home, the home that I'm recording this in. I may not be here for another broadcast. We'll explain why as we go. But for family and friends, I know this is a story that I've written out. I've posted on Facebook. I have shared it with many friends, and it's kind of long. I try to abbreviate everything, but I want you to hear from me what exactly happened by my narration, and have a way to publish this for the public. It was about 10 years ago now that my former spouse and I agreed to sign a mortgage with then Beneficial Finance Company, Beneficial Home Loan, it was also known as. And we agreed to do so after much thought and prayer, but it was something where I had spent so much time and so many years in the ministry doing something for teenagers, many things for teenagers actually. I'd been a youth pastor in 5 different churches at that time, and had built 3 of those youth groups up from scratch. I also was a director of a drop-in youth center. Was a Youth for Christ director in Elmira, New York for a total of 7 years. 5 years we had things up and running with finances to come in to do so. And none of the things that I ever did was able to draw a salary. There was a little short times here and there of different funds that came in, and a brief time with Youth for Christ that I took a salary, but I realized soon that if we were to keep it open, I had to stop taking a salary, and we did that for the sake of the young people coming in. We borrowed against our home again, and we went with the Beneficial Finance Company. We were struggling financially. Our credit wasn't the best that it could be. Though I would go on the air, I was on a syndicated radio show called Teen Talk Radio, which covered most of the populated Northeast, and had done so for several years. But I would go on the show and I would ask people for financial help. We were set up as a 501(c) tax-exempt corporation under the heading of Nolan Harkness Evangelistic Ministries Incorporated. And for whatever the reason, I understand many of those reasons now, but for whatever the reason, back then people just didn't support us much. I was greatly relieved one time when I, not in a positive sense, but at least it gave me understanding when I visited Syracuse Teen Challenge, which had 15 to 20 young men, different ages, living in a residential facility. They were getting set free by the power of God from drug addiction, and all types of cool things were happening as these young men grew in God. They had a staff of people, a couple of people there, and these men were having to go out in the woods on the hills of Syracuse with a station wagon and cut firewood, pick up firewood from the woods and drag it down, put it in the back of the station wagon, bring it down to their center to heat their facility because there wasn't enough donations coming in to support Teen Challenge. So I felt like I was not alone in my quest for reaching young people. Our 5-day-a-week, 5-minute-a-day broadcast called Teen Talk Radio was effective, and it did bless a lot of people, and there's testimonies to support that. Now, that's where I was. And one more time, I decided to borrow against the equity of my home, and I did so through Beneficial Finance. And in going into that situation, they told us at Beneficial that looking at our debt-to-income ratio, that it would be close. They didn't know if they could do it. They didn't know if it would quite make it. And we heard them say that, and we prayed and different things, but we've got a phone call a couple of weeks later, I think seemed like a long period of time, I don't remember the exact time, saying they'd figured out a way. They had figured out a way to get the mortgage through, and they would like us to come in and watch a video. Well, I had said to them, well, I have attorney Chris Denton in Elmira, a noted attorney who had handled real estate transactions in the past for me. I said, I have him all set up. He said, come watch this video first. And Beneficial Home Loans at that time were promoting a one-attorney closing, and they watching this video said, if you'll just use our one attorney closing process, then you will be able to expedite the whole thing. We'll be able to get done quicker, much cheaper. And we assure you that if there's any problems with the mortgage whatsoever, we have something called a loan mediation team that will come in from out of town, and they would meet with you and your wife. They will meet with our loan officers, and we'll discuss the problem, and we'll work it out. And that's the way we protect you and ourselves in this one attorney closing process. Now, hold that thought a minute, because as the closing went through, I am a country boy. I'm way too trusting. If any of you are out there like me, you need to grow out of that and understand that there's evil people in this world, and there are people that will tell you things and promise you the world, and you think it's all legitimate. They appear to be professional people with shirt and ties behind a desk in an office representing a big company, but they're lying through their teeth sometimes. And in this case, we went in to sign the mortgage papers. Both the attorney must have known about it and the loan officer must have known about it. But we just trusted, because they made sure that we submitted to them all our debt in order to qualify for the mortgage, plus ask for our Social Security numbers so they could do their own debt search to make sure that this mortgage would cover all of the debt. Now, this mortgage was in the amount of about $117,000, if I remember correctly, somewhere in that neighborhood. And where we trusted them was to let them do the math. This was a foolish mistake, we realized, but we did trust them to do the math. About a month after the closing, we started getting phone calls from some of our creditors. And those phone calls were them saying, you're behind on your payment, you need to make your payment, whatever. Some of it was by mail. And we assured them that we had just borrowed against our home, against the equity of our home, and that those things were going to be paid out, that it was all automatically paid through the mortgage, and they should have their money any day. Well, a few weeks later, when we're still hearing from them and they'd not gotten paid, I called Beneficial Finance in Horseheads, New York, and I asked them, and they said, Mr. Harkness, Reverend Harkness, please come in for a meeting. We would like to have a meeting with you about this, as they did some checking. And I went in for such a meeting, and in the meeting, it was discovered that they had taken about $13,500 of our debt, and I say figuratively, they put it like in a drawer somewhere, like it didn't exist. And then they took the balance of that money and put the mortgage through under those numbers. And now their suggestion was, their fix is, I was in shock. I brought it to my former spouse. I was, needless to say, I was outraged over this situation. And how could they do this legally? Well, Mr. Harkness, we're going to have a meeting with our regional people and so on, and you come back, and we're sure there's something that we can do. And what it was that they suggested was, they started out by saying, we're going to give you an $8,000 loan. By the way, it's something like 23% interest, short term, to cover the immediate debt. And then we're going to put through a second mortgage to cover this money that wasn't included in the first mortgage. Now, keep in mind that this first mortgage wouldn't have qualified, according to them, to have all the money in it. That shouldn't have been my problem. I should have been told that in the front side, but I wasn't, and it was deceitful, and it was covered up. I would love for you, as a listener, people who care about us and know about the situation, to go on PBS website, Public Broadcasting System, and do a search on the Fannie Mae housing bubble crisis of 2005 to 2007. That's right in where this took place for us. It's in that window where mortgage companies across America were writing mortgages and using deceitful means to write those mortgages, and that's exactly when this happened. There are laws in place now to protect these things from happening, very strict laws. My wife now works for a bank and has been able to provide information to me that's been priceless in the battle. Matter of fact, I've been able to hold Beneficial, by the way, eventually to get out of it, in my opinion, sold this mortgage to Caliber Home Loans, and we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. So our initial complaint was against Caliber, or against a Beneficial Finance, and then to add smokescreen to what they had done in their screw-ups, they quick sold the loan over to Caliber Home Loans, and they're out of Oklahoma City. I would caution you against doing business with Caliber Home Loans. Beneficial Home Finance no longer exists as a business, but Caliber Home Loans is just a mortgage company that, by all natural understanding, just buys up mortgages wherever they can, and then they have no interest in working with the people that just want to foreclose on them and sell them and get their money. They're probably buying them for about 50 cents on the dollar, I understand, from what the mortgage is actually worth, just so that the banks can get some money out of it. But back to the Beneficial in the story there, we're going to offer you a second mortgage. My former spouse, a very pacifist lady, in the sense of fighting anyone or anything, said she was not willing to go after these people with attorneys. Our marriage, which was already struggling and already had issues that goes beyond the realm of most people's comprehension. I'll try to protect the situation there and not mention it. I'll mention it a little later, the issues we were up against, but eventually ended up in a divorce. And because of that, I'm going to lean forward. I got to take a little drink of water as we go here. Excuse me. Because of that, there was a lull of time where, by the way, our mortgage payments with the second mortgage, which my wife refused to fight, my then wife, former spouse, went from $900 and some a month to $1,370 some a month. It was a huge jump. And like someone said, again, why did you not have credit to cover this amount on a mortgage, but now all of a sudden you've got credit to cover a second mortgage within just a few months period of time? Whoever hears of a second mortgage within a few months, usually second mortgages are added 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, put on an addition or something like that. But in this case, they railroaded it through, pushed us into it. We felt we had no recourse at the time, and I felt victim to mortgage fraud and deception by the loan originators and different people involved in this. So I went into the divorce, and immediately I was in a situation where I was faced as a single parent with two of my children living at home. They were older, but I was granted custody of the children. I was granted child support by my former spouse. But at the same time, I had to, as a minister, had to take a job to get benefits at a local college, and I'm still working there to this day. And the financial strain on me was great. I had enough to cover my bills, but at the same time, this $1,375 mortgage payment, which I was still feeling just sickened by, all of a sudden I started getting threatened by the mortgage company with foreclosure notices. Because of the emotional strain, and some of you are familiar with not a military-based PTSD, but emotional-based PTSD, through the strain of the first marriage, I was facing losing my children, losing my home, and losing the ministry God had given me. All three through the failure of a marriage. The stress on me was just off the chart. Then I developed a type of post-traumatic stress disorder that I was having to see a psychiatrist and a psychologist for. I hate to say it, but I was on some medication because of it. It was just terrifying to me. I think to this day, in this day and I live now, I would not need such intense support because of special ministry I've gotten and training and teaching about the faith in God and the Word of God since that time. But I was in that place when this was all hitting. I wrote to the New York State Attorney General's office, which was Cuomo at that time. He was a state attorney general's office and state attorney general in that time period in history. And I happen to have a friend who was very familiar with his office, with him and his office, and worked in and out of Albany on a state level. And that friend helped me to contact the right people. I sent a letter through. And at that point in time, all phone calls stopped. All harassment stopped from Beneficial. I went to Catholic Charities to try to do something which fairly few people had heard about at that time, called a loan modification. We appealed to Beneficial for a loan modification in that time period. The only thing that they were willing to offer me then was a loan adjustment, temporary adjustment on the payments, which is only like $120 a month. Really wasn't helpful. So at that point, I put my foot down and I gave them a plan, and I said, if you will take the mortgage from a 15-year mortgage to a 30-year mortgage, put it in my name, and I can afford $700 and some a month to pay on this house. If you will do that, then everything will be fine, and we'll be able to work together. I'll be able to make mortgage payments. But unless you're willing to do that, then I'm done. I can't. If you have to take my home, take my home. But I want you to know this home is in God's hands, and whatever happens is in His hands at that point. At that point, I refused to make any further mortgage payments until they were willing to do something. Now, you may know in today's world, loan modifications are quite common. As a matter of fact, Beneficial Finance did nothing for almost 6 years. I secured the use of a local attorney, very knowledgeable in real estate matters, and he had been up to date and attended extra college classes recently to understand the latest laws and foreclosure and loan modification and mortgages, and the guy was just great. I guess I won't mention his name on this video, but he's just a wonderful man, and God used him to help me mightily. We began to write some letters as much as 4 to 5 years ago to Beneficial after we didn't hear from them for a long time. Again, it was a total of about 6 years until we heard from them again, and the testimony, I think, is going to amaze you of what happened. So now I've got a mortgage company. I haven't made a mortgage payment in several years. I'm living in a house God called me to build, which is another story in itself. I had met my now wife. Her first name is Edie. And I won't mention where she works or anything, but that she works for a bank. And we were eventually married, and we both felt a joint calling to start a children's home. She had lived in Texas and felt the calling to start one at some point in her life. She tried down in Texas and didn't really work out. She even tried when she moved back to New York. It's her home area. Where she grew up, but it didn't seem to work. But it was the one glue that bonded us together was right on. We discovered that God had both spoken to our hearts about starting a children's home. And the joy in our hearts as we started taking foster classes together, and we started working on this home and remodeling every room. Edie is the hardest working woman I've ever met in my life. And she loves to make things just neat and clean and fresh looking, and fresh coats of paint went on everything. Any rooms that didn't have molding finished, I finished. We did ceiling, floors, carpeting in a lot of areas, some hardwood floors, replacing. Went through the house, every room, and this house was built for God's glory. If you want to go to my website, it's www.verticalsound.org. and click on the story of the House of Miracles, and you will see that there in written form in a Word document you can print out. So here we are going a year and a half in our marriage, fixing up this home, loving it and living it, and sharing our testimony with people. And we had taken the foster care classes. We came out of the foster care classes, and the last night of full classes, there was going to be one more week, but that was to get our diplomas and to have a little party and watch a video. We'd actually completed all the classes at that point. We came home rejoicing, pulled in our driveway after 6 years of Beneficial being silent, and then, of course, by then they had sold it to Caliber Home Loans. There was foreclosure notices on our front door. Yes, I'm telling you the truth. It sounds like something out of a storybook, but it's the truth. They had 6 years to move, because if they didn't move within 6 years, the statute of limitations would have expired. As a matter of fact, we were watching that closely ourselves, and I consulted with, I think it was 3 different attorneys about that. And the attorney that worked so closely with me, we really felt we had them. in that win. We felt that they had gone over. We began to put legal documents together after the foreclosure came in and petitioned the local court. The local Chemung County Supreme Court, for some reason, and they have the legal right to do this, refused to hear our petition requesting that the original documents of the mortgage be brought forth and beneficial be tried on a type of fraud. She signed the papers that just moved it on through to the next level. As I study foreclosure things, and of course I study the whole Fannie Mae housing bubble thing of 2005 through 2007 and what took place, and you study that online and the court cases that have followed, because states, and New York is one of the strongest, most powerful states to try to make sure that banks and lending institutions bend over backwards, is the term used tongue-in-cheek, to keep people in their original homes through loan modifications. A very common practice, and I'm going to share with you in a minute what happened with us in that. But what happened was the local court, the Chemung County Supreme Court here, would not require Beneficial to produce those original documents, allowing the foreclosure to go through. We went to court and tried to petition the court, and it was just denied. But what I want to say is nationally, it says some judges favor the banks and won't look at these types of things too deeply, and other judges favor the borrowers and will really go after the banks if they did wrong in the beginning on them. And so it's just a matter of what's legal and what isn't, what they can do and what they can't do. So we were over a barrel and had no recourse at that point. We started a procedure with Now Caliber Home Loans as our fight was over in the county court against them to apply for a loan modification, which should have been our right to do so. I want you to know that in my former marriage, I was in the history to follow. I was having to deal with some LGBT issues, and what they asked was, because her name was on the original mortgage, is that we asked for her to sign something called a quitclaim deed, which would have taken her name completely off of the mortgage, and she would have never had a foreclosure on her credit record, would have never had to deal with this again. And initially she said no. And several of us went to prayer, and God began to use a series of different things to, I believe, speak to her heart. I don't know exactly how that happened, but all of a sudden, I think possibly my kids talked to her some. All of a sudden, because I said, we're going to lose this house to the bank, and there's no reason neither one of us should get it. I also want you to know that I set up for a situation where if I kept my home and the former spouse was willing to sign this quitclaim deed, that in my passing, my children, all three of them, would inherit this house. And whatever it's worth, they could sell it. One of them could keep it and buy out the other two or whatever. But they would. It was all set up in a will for that to happen. So I wasn't just being totally selfish. We were going to have it as a children's home. Eventually it would be something more of a type of Christian-based business where we'd have staff here 24/7. There would be multiple children living here. And Edie and I would simply manage it and be here some ourselves to oversee the care of the children. The former spouse initially turned that option down, and then with some outside pressure and possibly some dealings from above, she said, okay, I will sign such a paper, but a meeting with her attorney, I'm not sure how she came up with this idea. She said, I'm going to sign the paper, but I'm going to have it held in escrow until the bank will take my name off it, until the lender will take my name off of it. Well, everyone knows that they're not going to take her name off of it until they have the signed documents, and so it's stalemated, and the time window expired. During that time, God gave me the wisdom to write one of the vice presidents of the company. Now, I had also appealed the case to the New York State Attorney General's initially, but the New York State Department of Financial Services and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. These are two powerful governmental agencies, and they're the watchdog over banking practices. Consumer Financial Protection Company writes policy and procedure for banks, and they do that to keep banks honest and to watch over the consumer. And it's like the CIA and the FBI of banking, these two agencies. They can fine these companies tens of thousands of dollars. They even have the power in rare cases to reverse a foreclosure and make a bank give the homeowner their house back. In today's world, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has laws in place and policies in place that say, for instance, that they are to use something called reasonable diligence to work with a homeowner to keep them in their home, and that they're not supposed to prejudge that homeowner and say, oh, we're not going to work with them because of this or that or back payments or any of those things. They really have to look at it like a clean slate. And they have to, like say, bend over backwards because New York State wants to keep homeowners in their homes. Caliber Home Loans did not do this at all. They did not follow this procedure, and I filed initial complaints with them against some other issues, but when they started to railroad through and reject they wouldn't even take our application at that point for a loan modification without the former spouse's signature in the quitclaim deed. I had sent a letter to one of their vice presidents, I started to say before, the vice president in charge of customer complaints. I had her name because she was one of the ones that had written, her name was Courtney Ruiz. Courtney had written to the New York State Department of Financial Services in answers to one of my initial complaints and said, please contact my office with any further concerns. I sent her a letter explaining that I was dealing with an LGBT issue, that I could not put pressure on the former spouse to sign, that was totally up to her, and I felt that maybe she would sign, but it would take time, and we asked for more time, which I found out from their organization employees. They do give time extensions to some people in rare situations. Caliber Home Loans both reported to Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the New York State Department of Financial Services that they had tried to contact, quote unquote, Mr. Harkness twice, and he did not return their phone calls. Now listen to me a minute. Listen good. I was on the phone with them over a several month period almost once a week. There might have been a few times it was every other week. I had written down the names of the people that I talked to, their employee numbers. I had talked to them in great detail. Not only that, I had sent a letter to Courtney Ruiz from Caliber Home Loans explaining to them that I am the head electrician at a college in Elmira, New York, and that I get a lot of phone calls during the day that I just can't answer them all. I don't know who they are. So if they were going to try to call me, please let me know the number by which the phone call would come in at. At that time, I was communicating with them through email, so they had my email address. They had already communicated with my attorney and had his phone number and email address and physical address. They had my physical address. They had a way of contacting me, again, by phone, if they chose to do so. There were many modes of communication. What this was an attempt by Caliber Home Loans to provide misleading information to New York State Department of Financial Services and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Folks, this is a criminal offense on their part. They were not being above board on their actions. They were trying, again, to throw another smokescreen into the picture and act like I just didn't return calls. I was eager to communicate with them through this whole process, and they just ignored it. So here we are now, months down the road. The foreclosure went through. Thank God for supportive family and church people that stood by me. When we were in Texas visiting grandchildren recently, they attached something to our door that made it sound like an eviction notice. It was terribly stressful, very painful. And should I win this, I think I'm going to go after them with a lawsuit for pain and suffering, because they have put us through a type of suffering and emotional stress that is second to none. And so you have to understand that this is a very, very painful time. We came home. I contacted my attorney, a great Christian brother, took those documents, took them to my attorney, and we found out that they were something which is a notice to quit, which is the first process in an eviction notice. This next Tuesday, I'm doing this recording on, let me get the date right, July 9th, I'm sorry, 2017. On 7/11/17, I am now petitioned to go to court and hear what the eviction requirements will be. We have rented a dumpster. We had church people here all weekend. We've cleaned the house out of all non-essentials and things we don't want to move. We've had all types of pain and suffering surrounding this and sleepless nights. I ask you to pray, but I want you to hear the whole story. I don't know what's going to happen after Tuesday night. We may have to vacate the property, but I don't intend to quit the fight, and I know that this case is still open. These are still open cases against Caliber Home Loans with New York State Department of Financial Services and Caliber Home Loans. In the month of March, I don't know about the other months, I haven't checked lately, but in the month of March, over 30 complaints were filed with Consumer Financial Protection Bureau against Caliber Home Loan and their mortgages. If there's anybody watching this, I would encourage you to not do business with them at all. And also know that recently it was posted online that there's over $3 million lawsuit in the state of Texas against Caliber Home Loans by a real estate company for non-payment of funds. Just those of you that know how to pray, please pray for us. I trusting somebody was able to watch through this whole story. It's lengthy. It was over 30 minutes, and I apologize for that. But anybody really wanting to know the truth about what happened here, this is it. And from my heart to yours, God bless you. Have a great night.